Hello and welcome to the Trusted Professional Podcast provided by NYCPA, the New York State Society of Certified Public Accountants. I am Calvin Harris Jr., a CPA and CEO of the Society, and I'm your host. This is a podcast provided by NYCPA where I interview leaders in the accounting profession in New York and beyond, as well as those who influence this space. We help you connect, learn, and lead within the accounting profession. In this episode, we present an interview with Mark Stone, a CPA here in New York. But before we get to Mark, let's discuss the news of the day. First, before talking about broader news, I of course want to highlight the ongoing work of our 14 chapters around the state and our 60-plus communities of practice and committees that are doing amazing things and local work throughout New York State. At the time of this recording, one of the events we are planning is our Moynihan Scholarship Fund golf event set for October the 28th in Rockland County. Please go to the NYCPA website at nysscpa.org for more information. That event and all other events throughout the state can be found on the event calendar on the nysscpa.org website. We hope to see you at one of our events. Now for news outside of the Society, in our last episode, we talked about the exposure drafts provided by the AICPA and NASBA that I had said were decades in the making. Well, after news of something that was approximately 2 decades in the making, we have something that is actually 3 decades in the making, and that is the announcement of the next Chief Executive Officer of the AICPA. And that announcement comes with New York roots, as Mark Cozio has been announced as of the time of this recording, less than 24 hours ago, as the new Chief Executive Officer of the AICPA and SEMA, starting on January 1st of 2025. Mark has an extensive background within the profession, as he is currently the CEO of Allianz Global, the world's second largest accounting organization. Allianz Global has 268 member firms with locations throughout the world, generating over $6 billion in collective revenues. He is responsible for strategic planning, financial performance, and the organization's overall growth and success. Prior to joining that organization in 2020, Mark spent 14 years with the AICPA and later the association. And here's the New York connection. He began his career at an accounting firm in Buffalo, New York. Go Bills. He has been a leader and an advocate for the accountants over many years and has appeared within the top 10 of Accounting Today's top 100 most influential people in accounting multiple times and has been named to the International Accounting Bulletin's Global Accounting Power 50 list. We're very excited to see Mark start in the near future. And of course, we, as so many others in the profession, want to extend our thanks to Barry Melanson, who is retiring after 3 decades of service to the profession. So with that news of the day presented, which is clearly the biggest news we've had in quite some time, we now turn to our interview with Mark Stone, CPA. All right, and welcome back to the Trusted Professional Podcast, sponsored by and provided by New York State Society of CPAs. I'm very excited to have our guest today, Mark L. Stone, CPA. Mark is the managing partner of Sales Tax Defense LLC since 2006. The firm specializes in sales and use taxes, and Mark's work as a New York State tax auditor, as well as a tax manager and principal at several prominent accounting firms over the past 30 years, has earned him a reputation as one of the top professionals for multi-state sales and use taxes. He's frequently invited by various organizations to speak on sales and use tax issues and serves as an expert witness, testifying in tax court on behalf of clients. Mark was also an adjunct professor at Long Island University C.W. Post. He has numerous areas of practice and numerous professional affiliations, including, of course, as a member of NYCPA, the New York State Society of CPA. So want to welcome Mark. Welcome to the Trust Professional Podcast.
Calvin, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Oh, so am I. Thank you so much. This is going to be a great conversation. And I read your background, and obviously you're an expert in this area, but I want to go way back a bit, if you don't mind. So I'd love to understand how you got from, even thinking about accounting or thinking about being a CPA to now. So I'd love to hear your origin story of sorts. So what was your journey into the field of accounting?
So my journey into the field of accounting started with engineering. Went away to school for engineering for a couple of years and determined that it wasn't for me. But of course, I went into engineering because I was a math person, because that's what they tell you to do in high school if you're a math person. And came home and then went to Queens College and I got my BA in accounting from Queens College. And that led me on an interesting little journey into sales tax, which has been my professional life for the last 30 years. What had happened was when I was going to Queens College, I was working as a waiter at a catering hall. And the head bartender there was a New York State income tax auditor who would moonlight on weekends as the bartender there. So what happened was when I graduated with my accounting degree, he said to me that New York State was hiring tax auditors. Come take the test. So I took the test and when I graduated, I was offered 2 jobs, one in Manhattan at a big brokerage house and one with New York State. And I lived out in Nassau County at the time, in Nassau County. And between everything that the job in the city wanted me to start at 8 in the morning and New York State wanted me to start at 9 in the morning in Nassau County rather than in lower Manhattan, I said, I think the quality of life is just going to be better for me living in Nassau or working in Nassau. So I took a job with New York State as a tax auditor, and they offered me 2 different positions, one either as an income tax auditor or the second as a sales tax auditor. And at the time, the sales tax department in New York State was 3 times the size of the income tax department. So there were 3 times as many auditors and 3 times as many managers and 3 times as many supervisors. And I said, all right, there's 3 times as many advancement opportunities. So I decided to be a sales tax auditor. So that's what led to my life here today.
Yeah, so that's very interesting because 2 things I picked up on. First was the decision, or I'll say not necessarily the deciding factor, but the start time and the travel sound like it played a part in there. And just doing the rough math, I'm guessing the option to work remotely or to use technology wasn't necessarily as prominent at the time. Am I right?
No, working remotely was not a thing. And to be honest, even with COVID, all through it with my firm, we had adequate spacing. We didn't allow remote work other than one person that had a medical necessity. And we've been in the office through the whole thing, other than people that need to work at home one day for the kids or for this or for that. We're in the office. And I think it's so much better being in the office and collaborating together.
I do have to admit that while so many of us, myself included, have had to get used to doing things remotely, I do think there is something to be said on interpersonal connection. I find it's still hard to replicate that on a computer screen, unless you have an established relationship. But that's amazing. And I also noted that you began effectively or essentially in another career path, which I need to go back and take count. But I think at this point, about half of the people that we've had conversations with so far on the Trust Professional podcast began their thought, whether it was in school or even a second career, in something other than accounting. We've had dentists, we've had models, we've had actors, we have engineers, although it sounds like you might also be a great bartender. But it is interesting how on so many folks, they end up finding their sweet spot in accounting. So that's very helpful.
Well, it's an amazing career that I think people don't really give enough credit to. When you balance all the different pieces, the work-life balance, the stability, the financial rewards, and if you work into it a little bit, the commute or the lack thereof.
Yeah, all true. And hey, we need to get those stories out there a little bit better. And in many ways, you kind of led right into the next thing I wanted to ask you, particularly given your extensive experience. And what do you see as, some of our challenges or even our biggest challenge you're seeing? Well, it could be accounting, it could be even a little broader. What do you see as our challenges out there?
My perception is that while it's a very important part of accounting, a lot of kids, a lot of college students only really know about the big 4 or maybe the new big 8. And there's a whole world outside of that, whether small firms, the private sector, a lot of things that are actually accounting, but not what people think of sitting at a desk. And I would say green paper because I'm old enough to remember that, but I think Excel schedules or Google Docs or something.
Yeah.
Like that. And getting those kids interested in accounting and getting the word out. A lot of people say that finance is a lot glitzier, that you can make a lot more money. And I actually don't think that that's true. My parents always told me the story that my dad worked in brokerage. He worked for Merrill Lynch for a number of years and had some great years. But then when the market was down, they really had some terrible years. And ultimately, he took a different job with the New York Stock Exchange that was paid less, but was much more consistent. And one of the things that my parents said to me when I went into accounting, when the market's good and people make money and the economy is good, people file their taxes. When the market's bad and people lose money and the market's down, people file their taxes.
Well, that's a great piece of advice. It just happens to be true as well. No, that is true. We're always there.
So there's something to really be said for the stability in the profession. And what a lot of people don't understand is a lot of accountants, myself included, have many, many clients. And some clients come and some clients go. And you lose a client, you get a client. And if you're not happy with a client, you legitimately fire the client. There's no reason to deal with people that are disrespectful, or if you say, I'm going to call it accounting boundaries, I need to have your information by April 1st if I'm going to do your taxes. And I don't do income taxes, so I'm kind of just trying to give an example.
I understand, yeah.
And the person knocks on your door at 10 p.m. on April 14th. You're like, no, just no. And if they want to go someplace else, you say, goodbye, have a nice day. Because you can develop a beautiful practice that gives you a really decent life by just setting some boundaries for your client. And it may take a few years, but a lot of people can develop a really nice book of business, a really nice client set, people that you become friendly with, that value your advice. And it's not a bad life. It really isn't.
I mean, that's such an important nugget. Well, you put a few out there, really, that there. When I think back to my years of doing consulting, I will freely admit one of the challenges I had, particularly when I started, was my lack of boundaries. When you're starting out, you're trying to grow your business, and you take on clients, still good people, of course, but really not good fits for you. And I didn't realize that quickly enough, how important that you actually can fire a client if they're not a good fit. You actually should stick with what you think your services are worth. And, if it's not a good fit for them, it doesn't mean you're not friendly or cordial. It just means you just wasn't a great business relationship. And that's important for people to remember.
Very much the truth.
Yeah. And to your point on the big firms, that absolutely is one of the things that, certainly one of the things I'm focused on. I mean, I certainly began my accounting career in the stereotypical big firm, no offense. I mean, I'm talking about myself here, but in the stereotypical, big firm space, and then loved my experience at Anderson, but thought that I had better fits elsewhere. And, the reality is most of our accounting students or people who are thinking of accounting, many of them will find a great experience in a big firm or another firm, but the numbers make it pretty much clear that in so many cases there'll be other things that you'll want and need to consider in there, and we don't always remind folks that there are a lot of options. Nothing wrong with starting there, but there are also a lot of great options that we need to put out there, particularly smaller firms, which a lot of times people will have a better experience, a better fit for them.
And I've kind of seen both ends of the spectrum. I worked for New York State for about 2.5 years as a sales tax auditor. And it was a great job. And I worked with some really nice people, but unfortunately, the state does not pay very well, at least compared to the private sector or public accounting. And, I was a young kid at the time, and among my goals was to get married and buy a house and have children, and just really wasn't doable on a state salary.
Yeah.
So I left the state and I went to work for a public accounting firm. And that public accounting firm, traditional audit, what people really think of accounting, but they had me traveling 2 weeks a month, and it just wasn't for me. So I stayed there for about 2 years, learning really what accounting is. Because as much as you learn in college, you don't learn it the same way as when you're actually doing it. Then I left and went to a different firm that's also a Big Ten firm now, into their tax department, because there was no traveling in their tax department.
Mm. Yeah.
And I was there for about a decade, and I had built up my own book of business, and I had an internal book of business, and I had said to the partners there, I want to be a partner. And they said, all right, next year. Okay, I'll wait. And next year I said, I want to be a partner. And they said to me, next year.
Uh-oh.
And I said, goodbye.
Yeah.
I gave my notice.
Yeah.
And I took my book of business, and left. And I had met somebody, and we went into business together. And he had an office in the city. I had an office on the island. We were partners for about 2 years. Small firm, small you can really get. It was a terrible business combination for a whole bunch of reasons, which is a whole other podcast. We separated, and I rebranded the practice as Sales Tax Defense because I was doing exclusively sales tax work from the time I left New York State, basically, other than the 2 years I did auditing, and really built up my book of business. And, started with a $150,000 book of business, and now my book of business is 10 times that number, and it has really, knock on wood, worked out. And unlike people think that, counting and pushing a pencil and reconciling numbers, that's not what I do at all. I understand the law. I read the law. I read court cases. As my ex-wife will testify to, I can be a very disagreeable person. And I spend a good part of my days now arguing with New York State about what is and what isn't taxable and what clients owe and what they don't owe, and going to hearings and fighting with the government, because a lot of things in the law don't make sense, and a lot of things in the law aren't fair, and clients need someone to advocate for them. And that's a big part of my life, my professional life at least, which I don't think college kids, again, think about that's accounting.
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. And the thing is, I sometimes remind folks, the CPA, the P in there is public for, we literally serve the public trust very often as an advocate for folks. And that sounds like the heart of what you do in so many cases. Now, I'm curious, how did you choose sales and use tax as your area of expertise?
Well, it had to do with the jobs I was offered. So I took that job as a sales tax auditor. And then surprisingly, when I left the state, I did my 2 years of auditing experience. And then when I went to work at this other big firm, they put me in the tax department. And they were like, "You used to work in New York State as a sales tax auditor, right?" I said, "Yes." And then when a client had a sales tax problem, they put it on my desk.
Right out there, right.
And I honestly learned so much more at that firm, being forced to do the work and being forced to advocate for clients and being forced to go head to head in some cases with the people that I literally sat next to 2 years earlier when I was an auditor, is really where I got the vast majority of my functional experience. People think today that everything I know I learned from working for New York State. It's not. It's from doing my job is where I learned everything I know.
Yeah, that makes sense though to me, because it seems like, and so I know, at least for me, sometimes the knowledge really gets locked in when I have to challenge myself, when I have to put it into practice. No pun intended. And it sounds like for all the expertise you naturally gained from working on the state side, it was once you had to think through challenges that came through, it forced you to know it on an even deeper level. Is that overstating it a bit? Not
at all. It's very true. If you're going to advocate for a client against the government, you have to know the rules better than the government, because the way all the tax laws are written, if people would know this, is that there's this presumption in America that you're innocent until proven guilty. And that's true with criminal code. But with the tax code, the rule is when an assessment is issued, it's deemed to be correct unless you can show it's incorrect by a preponderance of the evidence. So you have to be able to prove to a judge that the government is wrong to get an assessment dismissed. And that's true with just about every type of tax. So you got to know it better than the government if you're going to even have a chance at convincing a judge that your clients don't owe money.
That right there, that one line is an important line that I would dare say the general public aren't remotely aware of. If you think about all the shows and movies that'll say, or certainly in various documents, innocent until proven guilty, but that difference on the tax side is not an insignificant difference at all. And I suspect that you have to remind people of that pretty frequently. Would I be right on that?
Absolutely, because a big thing I run into is small businesses that don't keep any records.
Yeah.
And the government comes in and does a tax audit.
Oh, boy.
And what the law says, if you don't have any records to show them, the government makes up a number. They literally can just make up a number.
Yeah.
And then they issue it. Now, that assessment is deemed to be correct unless you could show it's incorrect. And then you go before a judge, and I'm super simplifying the process.
Sure, of course.
And you say to the judge, this assessment is wrong. And the judge says, absolutely. Show me your records to show me that it's wrong.
Yeah.
I don't have any records. All right, sustained. Like, that's it.
That's it, right?
So really, it's, you have to be, well, wait a minute, there's no rational basis for this assessment, and look at this indice and look at this other case where they found something different, and really have the judge then, all right, well, maybe this isn't such a fair assessment. Maybe it's arbitrary. And if it's arbitrary, then there's some room for adjustment in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, that's very important work. And I could see how it ends up being such a great fit for you. You touched on one example already, but I'm curious, whether it's in your job or even broadly. I mean, what's one thing you keep coming across, or one concept that so many people seem to get wrong, whether it's about the work you do or accounting? What is something that people just keep getting wrong, or they assume something that's not accurate?
I'm going to say two things, actually. The first thing is, people think if you don't owe money on a tax return that you don't have to file it.
Oh.
And I say to everyone, every time, you file a return no matter what, because it starts the statute of limitations. The other thing that I see with sales tax is a lot of people say it doesn't apply. It doesn't apply to me, I'm an accountant. It doesn't apply to me, I'm a construction company. It doesn't apply to me because I sell information services, or I'm a broker dealer, or whatever it is. And that's all entirely wrong, because what the law says is that while sellers have to charge and collect sales tax,
yes,
purchasers have to pay and remit sales tax. So if you buy something and you haven't been charged sales tax, you still need to pay the sales tax. So everybody buys stuff on the internet now. There's no one who doesn't. And a lot of out-of-state companies, for a variety of reasons, don't charge sales tax when they ship out of their home state into New York. And then the government comes in, and I've seen, for example, I've represented a lot of medical practices. And medical practices lease these MRI machines, and they can pay $300,000 a month, I've seen, for some of these machines. And they're leased from companies out of the Midwest, and they're not registered for New York sales tax, so they're not charging the doctor sales tax. And the state comes in and audits these medical practices for 6 years, because the doctors aren't paying sales tax, so they're not filing sales tax returns. So rather than doing a 3-year audit, they do a 6-year audit. And they owe $30,000 a month in back sales tax on the lease of the MRI equipment for 60 months, for 3 years. I mean, for 6 years, I'm sorry, 72 months. I'll do my math right. And they get bills of $500,000 with interest and penalties, sometimes more. And, the doctors go crazy over it. I don't blame them.
Yeah.
And they never gave it any thought. And one of the biggest things that I preach to everybody about, and I do a lot of seminars, I do a lot of public speaking, I give a lot of CPE credits to other accountants, is you should always give advice, and your advice should always be in writing. And you have to tell a client, do this, do this, do this. And I always say, I'm clearly no one's mother. You and I share the same haircut, so we're clearly both nobody's mom. And for those of you that are just listening to this, there is no hair in this conversation whatsoever.
Other than surrounding our mouths. Right. That's about
it. Exactly. Because clients don't remember. I mean, I can tell a client when they leave my office that when it's 12 noon, that it's bright and sunny outside, and they'll walk outside and say it's dark in the nighttime. And I'll be like, where did you get that from? So everything has to be in writing. So when they come back to you 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years later and be like, you told me wrong, or you didn't tell me at all, you're going to be like, I advised you to do this, and you chose not to listen to me. That's not my fault. And occasionally you get a good client that says, I'm going to go back to my office and reread what you wrote to me 2 or 3 times, and they actually make a change when they get back to their office.
Yeah.
And then something happens, and I've had this happen where they call me up 2 or 3 years later, and they're like, well, we had the government contact me, and we showed them this is what we were doing. And they said, great. And they went away. And when the government goes away without giving you a bill, I mean, that's a tremendous win for your client.
Oh, for sure. And I would imagine you've got a client for as long as they're in existence. I'd be afraid to leave that scenario. So I imagine that really locks in your client base as well.
I'll say yes and no. I have a very transactional practice because I handle a lot of problems.
Sure.
If I do my job properly, I fix those problems.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't come back.
Yeah.
But along those lines, I have a lot of clients that call me once every 2 or 3 years, and I spend an hour on the phone with them, and we just make sure it's going the right way. And then they go back to their regular accountant because I don't do regular accounting work. And then, they just do it right, because a lot of people don't want aggravation. If you run your business properly and your business makes money, you pay a little bit more to do it right. You pay a little bit more in taxes. And then when something comes up, you have records, it's clean, you're not worried about being audited, you don't lose sleep. When you go to sell your business, someone wants to buy it because nobody wants to buy a mess.
Right.
And there's a tremendous value in that.
Right.
When people go to buy these restaurants and there's no records and it's an all cash business, a lot of people won't buy them because they're like, well, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you did last week. Yeah, you told me you did $1 million last week, but your tax return shows you did $6 last week. Yeah. There's a lot of value in doing it the right way.
For sure. So it's interesting. So you touch on a few times that I just want to amplify it a bit on how, CPAs, particularly with someone with your background, can choose a particular area of expertise, become an expert in that industry, on that function, for lack of a better word. And that can be your practice. Like if someone has a problem, they call in the expert. You're that expert for that particular area because that's where the focus is. Is that overstating it a little bit, or
that's my entire practice? I get 80 to 90% of my work from other CPA firms, and I talk to a lot of clients that referred to me, and they say, "Well, I think I should fire my accountant because he did not help me with this."
Oh,
and I'm like, "You have it exactly backwards there." Because you want someone who tells you, I don't know, because there's too much to know. And somebody who says to you, I know everything, knows everything incorrectly. And just like if you go to your doctor, your family practitioner, and you say, I have chest pains, he sends you to a cardiologist. You have foot pains, he sends you to a podiatrist. You have whatever, a pimple on your nose, he sends you to a dermatologist. You shouldn't be expected to know everything. And I think a better accountant actually says, I don't do this, but what I do for you, it's going to be right. And I think your clients really appreciate that once you explain that to them.
That's such a great and important point you just made there, because, and even the analogy, because I can think of quite a few times where I've seen a doctor or, nurse practitioner or medical professional for something general, and I had a specific problem that simply wasn't their area of expertise. And rather than try to stumble and fumble along to something that actually could do more harm to me, they sent me over to an expert, unapologetically. And then that expert sent me right back to them when it was all settled. I didn't think any less of that doctor. If anything, I was like, well, I'm glad you got me fixed. That's all I really cared about.
Right.
That mean we had to bring in someone else, then no problem. So that's a really good point. So let's take a slight pivot though. Now, I'm really curious what your answer is going to be on this. We'll do a little thought experiment. That's what I like to call it. We'll make you king, King Mark. We'll make you king of the accounting profession. You can go broad in that if you want, but if you had unlimited resources and no time constraints, what sort of innovative project or initiative would you take on to improve things, whether it's improving the accounting profession or heck, even broader than that? What would come up for you?
So I'll keep it narrow to my practice, actually.
Okay.
When I left the big firm and started my own firm, I did a crazy amount of networking, breakfast, lunch, dinner, to meet other accountants and other business owners to develop my practice. And one of the things I did was, and I've always done public speaking, and I've taught in college and graduate school, was give seminars to chambers of commerces all over Long Island. And, I'd have 15, 20 small businesses come to those meetings, a lot of times just starting up, and they knew nothing about sales tax. And you give me an hour or two of your time, I can get most people to know 80% of what they need to know to stay out of trouble, and know enough to know when they need to call their accountant or call me or call their lawyer or call somebody. I ultimately stopped doing that because it really didn't lead to any work for me. And I only have so much time, and I have children. I want to spend time with my children. And I always make the joke, but it's kind of true. I can't make a living telling someone whether or not there should be sales tax on a toaster oven. because on $3 of sales tax, how much can I charge them? At a certain point, it just doesn't make sense.
Right, right.
So when I was dealing with these very, very small businesses, I would love to help. I just can't be everywhere.
Yeah.
But if I had unlimited resources, what I'd like to do is really do a lot more education and stuff like that. So people could, because I think 98% of the business owners that get in trouble for sales tax didn't even know what they were doing wrong. There's 2 or 3 bad apples, but 97% really try to do it right. So what we just recently did, I reached out to a couple of congressmen and a couple of state assemblymen and offered to jointly host with them, because they have some small business days, to do seminars with them. And if they give me half an hour, 45 minutes to let people know just some basic stuff, like say to a doctor, do you know you got to pay tax on everything you buy? Say to a contractor, you need to pay tax on everything you buy. And then they say, but they're not charging me tax. Well, you still have to pay it, because from the clients I represent, their biggest complaint is not that they owe money, believe it or not. It's that they didn't know that they owed money. So when they get warned ahead of time, like, you're not allowed to do this if you get caught, when they get caught, they're kind of okay with it. But when they're like, I had no idea that I was going to owe $500,000 in back sales tax on my MRI machine, and now you know what, I have to sell my Fire Island house to pay for it. The doctor's not a happy camper.
Well, that would be a great thing. Not the selling of the house, obviously, but that would be a great thing, because I can't help but think of different small businesses, especially using that example, that the problems they have, frankly, don't scale for someone with your type of practice in that initial stage. But if those things grow over time, they might grow to a point to where it's just too big for them to do it. And I can just imagine that there are likely businesses that have had to shutter because they didn't get the help at the right time, or once they did realize it was a problem, it just might have been a little too late for them to resolve it in any sort of way. They had no house available, so to speak, to sell. So
that's such a great point, because a lot of things I do, business is in business the first year, we're not going to worry about it. And we're in business the second year, it's too small, I'm not going to worry about it. And the third year, all right, we're getting a little bit bigger, but we don't quite have the budget for it. And the fourth year is like, all right, we had a good year. And now they go to fix it in the fifth year. And now you have to go to the government and say, I want to fix my sales tax. So you have 2 choices. You can put down that you began doing business in year 5, but then you're filing a false or fraudulent return because you've been in business for the past 5 years, but you're putting down you started today. Or you can put down the true information that you started business 5 years ago. And then, of course, what does the government do in response to that registration? They mail you notices for 5 years worth of unfiled tax returns, because you told them you were in business 5 years ago. Where are your tax returns? So if we could really get businesses off to the right start, they would just forever stay out of trouble. But it's very hard, because when a person has a very, very limited budget, they can't see their accountant and their lawyer and 2 tax specialists and, an employment person to get all of these things that go wrong in businesses right. But I wish we could set them up the right way from the beginning.
Yeah, that's such an important thing. Well, I suspect we might have to come back to that offline, because that gives me some ideas for some support. Mark, this has been a great conversation, and the time has flown by very fast. But I did want to ask, what's one more question or topic or something that we should have talked about, or something I should have asked about that we didn't touch on?
Something unrelated, but accounting wise, I used to teach at school, in college and graduate school. The accounting world now requires a 5-year degree to be an accountant. And I'll take this as my personal opinion, because I know people are all over the place. I think it's a terrible idea, because, you go to school and, like, I have a master's degree. I got it in taxation, but I got my master's degree 10 years after I got my undergraduate degree, because I was practicing in taxation. But to make these kids specialize in college, take a 5th year for auditing or for taxation, where they might be doing something very different. I wish we could go back to the 4-year requirement and then have everybody get a master's in what really pertains to them 5 or 10 years later. I'd like to see that change if I could wave a wand and do something different.
Well, I can tell you with great confidence that these kind of discussions are going on right now in terms of what the place should be, what the right place can or should be. And, recognizing that so much of this was decided, 20-ish years ago, even now there are conversations and saying, hey, are we at the right place? I will say, and I've said something similar before, as a person who was a 120 CPA, I have a bachelor's. I did not get a master's because one was not required at the time. And over the years, I just chose not to. And I think I've done okay. But I think there's something to be said for all the different pathways. So I feel very confident that the point you just raised will be talked about a lot in the coming months and years, because it's an interesting time in the profession. That is well said. Thank you so much, Mark. Well, Mark, again, thank you so much for your time. You have such an amazing and interesting background and a very unique practice that I think just shows just how many different things a CPA and an accountant can do. So I was really glad to have you here, and thank you so much for joining me today on the Trust Professional Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed our interview with Mark. It's perfect timing. As of this taping, we just passed one of the critical tax deadlines on October 15th. And while it's not quite accurate that all CPAs do taxes, Mark shows that even within taxation, you can find a niche that will make you unique within the market. Mark obviously has deep background in taxation, given his master's degree in taxation and being a professor, and yet within that big area of taxation, he's created a unique place for himself in the profession. With that said, thank you for joining us on the Trust Professional Podcast. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to get this podcast delivered to you when it's released. And of course, please do rate and review our podcast, as it helps us continue bringing episodes to you. In addition, if you aren't a current member of NYCPA, I ask you to join us as a member and learn more about our events and activities at nysscpa.org and follow us on social media. Lastly, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, including possible interviewees, please email us at podcast@nysscpa.org. Thanks for listening.